that's what was happening. And now I had an option. Never tried it before, but there was a power setting we were allowed to use for 5 minutes called War Emergency Power, and that was 1450 horsepower each engine. So I put it there. It didn't slow down our descent, and we were going down into the valley. It wasn't enough. So I released the latch, and I turned the power lever, turbine control, in other words, for the turbo superchargers, to max, and turned it to the stop. And the only limit was the maximum allowable turbine speed of 25,000. And the manifold pressure gauge went off the scale. I don't know. I have no idea how much horsepower those engines were going. Meanwhile, the co-pilot, without exchanging words at all, he was handling other things in the engine, cowl flaps, controlling temperature, controlling the RPM, and it finally slowed down the descent. And when I thought about it later on, we were down there in the bottom of the valley, and that's probably why it slowed down, because the air currents had to level out. Well, now we're in the bottom of this valley. The power is unreasonably high level, and I got to get back up. The topography would have allowed me just to turn right and go down the valley, which would go into the Brenner Pass. Brenner Pass would take us down to the Adriatic, no problem. Except the Brenner Pass was the most highly defended strip in that whole area. The Germans even put anti-aircraft guns on the top of the ridges to shoot down at the night fighters. There was no way I was going to go that way. It was just suicide. So I just left the power alone and went sideways across, making little racetrack patterns, climbing a little bit and then make a steep turn, climbing some more, back and back and back. And finally, 22 minutes later, we broached the top of the mountain at 13,000 feet. And I could pull power back. Those engines never missed a beat. God bless Pratt & Whitney. And the co-pilot reported that no instrument went out of the green, let alone any caution. So, and of course it was February. It was February of 45. In fact, February 26th of 45, or 25. And so everything was good in the engine. So we thought, well, let's go over the main target one more time before we turn around and go home. Call it quits. Lo and behold, there's a big break in the clouds, and there's the target. It was supposed to be a frozen lake, but it was more like a glacier. So we made the run. We alerted them back there, and they left the airplane. Fred had told me before that he didn't want to have the standard altitude of 600 feet above the ground, which most cases was an estimate because the Germans drew all the maps up there. So we found out very, very early that they weren't to be trusted. And so he wanted to be at 300 feet, no more. In fact, he said, I really would like to be lower. I would like to be at the altitude that when I go out and the static line opens that chute, it'll pop out and I'll stop and my feet will touch. Wow. So I gave him 300 feet. They went out, we went off, came back at a predicted time, so that we wouldn't hover over where they were in case radar was watching us. And sure enough, they said, green light. So we gave them the containers. They went out, and we had it easy. We went home. That was it. Now, in debriefing, of course, I did hear Dick, who was riding in the nose turret, a couple of times saying, "John, turn." And I asked Dick, I said, how close did we get to the canyon wall, do you figure? He says, "I can't tell you that, John, but if you'd like to know how many needles there are on the end of every branch of a pine tree, I can tell you that." The navigator, my navigator was meticulous. He kept track of everything. He wrote down when I took the first power off and left cruising altitude to go down that thing, he marked down to the second. We had lost 6,000 feet in 18 seconds. There's no way that you can, in smooth air, there's no way you can make a B-24 go down 18,000 feet a minute. And that's what it would turn out to be, 18 or 19,000 feet per minute descent. And when I landed, the crew chief, he was also one of those meticulous people. In fact, I had a fantastic crew, both air and ground. And he would not touch the airplane anywhere until he put on his shop coat, wrapped it around himself, tied it up, drew a gallon of gas so he could wash the tools off before he touched the baby. And I'm telling him what I did. And I'm relating about what I said here. And I happened to look closely at his eyes, and the bottom of his eyes were getting wet. He took the airplane offline. He took all of the spark plugs out, checked them. They were all okay. He borescoped every single cylinder. Now, those people that don't know about what that means is when you take the spark plug out, of course there's a hole that looks right inside the cylinder. And they have this device like a gooseneck lamp, but it has a means of looking around and a little light on it. And they can put it inside there, and the mechanic can see the condition of the cylinder wall, see the valves, see if anything is scored. And he did that to every single cylinder. And each engine is 14 cylinders, so it took him a while. Everything was perfect. In fact, make a long story short, he did replace the spark plugs just because they were out, and I finished my missions with that airplane. And again, Pratt & Whitney. Now, meanwhile, the time went on. We didn't get any information back directly. The only thing they told us was the mission was a successful mission. And they thought it was worthwhile enough to give me a Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission, which I still have in a little thing on the wall. The rest of it I learned much, much later. And in 1960, the mid-60s, roughly, I had occasion to take the family up to Michigan, where my bombardier lived, and we visited there for a few days. And Dick says, at one time we were having dinner, he says, have you seen Fred? I said, Fred, who's Fred? He says, Fred Mayer, the team leader of Greenup. I said, I didn't know his name. Oh, yeah, that's right, he says. And that was a dispersion remark, if you will. and he said, well, he's living near you. He's living in Charlestown, West Virginia, and at that time my home was in Mount Vernon, Virginia. That's no more than 100 miles or so. So he gave me the address. On the way home, I put a note in his door because I found nobody home, and my telephone number, and left. And the very next day, I got a phone call, and he says, Friday, you're not doing anything important because you're coming out and having lunch with me. That's the kind of guy. I've learned some of the things that he did, and one of the things that he did admit to me, his vast pilot experience was one lesson in the glider. But he was a natural. He handled that B-24 like a cub. And this guy, he was my hero, I tell you. He had a genetic breakdown. I mean, his genes lacked the fear gene. Nothing bothered him. When the OSS was going to give him artificial papers to go, he says, I don't want any. He says, I don't want anything. They were dressed as night fighter pilot and radio operator. And the third man that went out was the Austrian. He would have been the same as an army captain, his rank, whatever they call it in Germany, I don't know. And the scenario that they were going to use, if somebody of a lower rank than Franz, or equal rank even, would come upon him, he could say, these are my prisoners, I'm taking them, because he was in his own uniform when he went out of that airplane. But his job was to direct them toward friendlies on the ground. And as soon as he did that, he went into hiding because the word got out that he didn't, he got too close to the front line and got captured on purpose. And he was actually in a POW camp in the southern part of Italy, and Fred got in a fake uniform of a pilot for the Nazis, and went in there, and what he really was doing was trying to find a person that could help the mission. And then in Barry, which was the OSS headquarters, Fred was offered these forged documents, and he wouldn't take them. Even they insisted. He said, no, I don't want anything on me whatsoever. So they landed and at the 10,000 foot mark, and then they used the skis and went down to about the 7,000 foot mark where they found a mountaineer shack, which they broke into.